Welcome to the Lee Schools TV podcast. I'm Adam Wright. Joining us today is Jeremy Ridgeo, Global Perspectives teacher at North Fort Myers High School. Jeremy, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Happy New Year, by the way.
Yes, I know.
You're
Brand new.
You're our first guest in the new year, 2020.
All right.
You have been teaching for 17 years now, is that right?
That's correct.
All 17 here in Lee County, or?
No, my first 5 years I taught, I'm originally from Syracuse, New York,
Okay.
so I taught 5 years in a small town called Canastota, and then got really tired of winter and snow, which lasts about 8 months up there, and decided to make a move. Had some friends that live down here. They cued me in to teach near the beach. Came down, attended, had a number of job opportunities, and landed at North Fort Myers High School, and that's where I've been ever since.
So I first met you a couple months ago when I was at North Fort Myers to film the video I did on the civics programs that we offer at our various schools here, and I was really interested in your class. So you teach Global Perspectives, which is a class that I never took in high school. It's part of the Cambridge ACE program at North.
That's correct. Yep.
So what can you tell me? What is Global Perspectives? What do you teach your students?
So Global Perspectives is focused on modern current issues, things like climate change, artificial intelligence, everything from terrorism to we do, migration, and then we look at it from a current stance, but we also then break down all the different perspectives that exist on that issue. And so what you see in high school students is that typically their viewpoints are influenced by those who are around, those adults that are around them most often. And what we do is we take time to look at all the different viewpoints, right? So what are the benefits of artificial intelligence? Okay, economically, politically, culturally, but also what are the downfalls? What are the potential issues that are going to arise? Is it going to cause mass unemployment, things like that? And Global Perspectives allows students to voice their own opinions. So it's really skills-based. They have to be able to communicate. They have to be able to back up what they're communicating. They have to be effective researchers. And then ultimately, they have to be able to write and or present to get those thoughts out. When you came in for the civics thing, we did Socratic Seminar. And that was just, essentially, I give them a question, a guiding question, but I allow them to go wherever they want to go. I think about it as like an intelligent dinner conversation. And then the rest of the students in the class are observing that, and we can interact after, 10 minutes or so as a bigger group.
So Socratic Seminar, that's when you, if you check out our civics video, you'll see it, but we can show the video right now for people who are watching on, Facebook or YouTube. But the students, you give them like a topic to explore, but they get to come up with the question that they want to discuss and they break up into small groups and sit in a circle and just talk to each other about the question at hand. And I think the question the day I was there was something about globalization, what if the far-reaching effects of globalization, something like that. I can't remember the specific one, but I remember one of the things that jumped out to me when I was interviewing you for the story was you were saying that you want to teach your students how to think, not what to think.
Right.
I think that's really important. So can you expound on that a little bit? Like, why is that important to you?
Yeah. So for me, in a situation like the Socratic Seminar, I want it to be really organic. I don't want to put up these restrictions on where the conversation could go. I just want to provide a question, and I want them to fill in everything that's interesting to them. The key point here is you can't know everything in my class. It's impossible. So let's see where the conversation flows, because if they can do that with 5, 10, 15 of their classmates in that situation, they're going to be able to do that when they go for job interviews, when they start off at college and university. That's a skill that's going to translate. And ultimately, for me in my class, the most important thing, the test that we give is, we have a lot of success on our exam. Sure, that's fine. But I ultimately want my students to have skills that are going to translate across their schedule, that aren't going to be limited to the one period of a day that they happen to be sitting with me. And so if they're effective communicators in that situation, especially the Socratic Seminar, I think they're effective communicators across the board.
Do you find that they really enjoy the conversation? I know it's probably harder to get some students to, say a lot when they get in those circles and talk about a topic. I'm sure other students are really engaged and really enjoy it. Does it depend on the topic, I guess? Or I know the day I was there, they seemed a little quiet. Might have been because I was sticking a camera in their face and maybe a little shyer than they would normally be. But what is the engagement levels like that you get from the students in those?
That balance It really varies. So you're going to have kids, like you're saying, who are more than willing to participate. And then you're going to have others who probably have really good ideas, and they're just, for whatever reason at the moment, don't have that confidence to just get involved. And for some reason, we've been trained, raise our hand, we'll participate, now it's my turn. In the Socratic Seminar, I actually try to encourage that not to be the case. I want them to get involved as soon as they have an idea. And there's always some little awkward moments here or there where, two kids try to talk at the same time, and it tends to work itself out without me having to interfere, and that's kind of the goal there. But then we do these sessions after the Socratic Seminar. I think you were there for this too, the debrief session, where the whole time they're talking, I'm writing down interesting things that's coming out of the conversation. And that way I can do follow-up questions where then I get a little bit more involved. I can drive a little bit more and start picking on, hands here and there, which will give those people who are maybe hesitant in the big group the opportunity to then jump in and get some points in there.
Are there certain, kind of like what I said, it probably depends maybe on the topic that they're discussing too, whether how engaged they are in it. Do you find that, are there certain topics of discussion that students find more interesting than others?
Yeah, and the way we do it is there's always 6 questions in a Socratic Seminar. We have 6 themes in global perspectives: politics, economics, environment, ethics, culture, science, and technology. Okay. And there's 1 question from every theme. The students are always grouped in 2 or 3, and then they work together within that group of 2 or 3 to break up the questions, so each of them is in the inner circle once talking. And so they work together to break up the questions that they're interested in, right? And so they kind of take care of that ahead of time.
And what was can you give us an example of, like I kind of botched earlier, I couldn't remember the globalization question, but can you remember a specific question that the students recently sat down and talked about?
I think the globalization question that you were in for was based on, does it make for a level playing field, or is it something along the lines of, is it good, does it increase or decrease, the socioeconomic differences between populations?
Yeah.
I think it was something along that lines. And we had just finished doing the globalization unit. One of the interesting ones we've done recently was about social media and social networking, but somehow we got down to this root question of, do words hurt, right? Are words violent? And then really exploring with students the difference between action and words and hate speech, and to hear their take on it, because really they're in the middle of it, right? Cyberbullying, I tell the students all the time, cyberbullying, when I was in high school, you always had the threat of, you're going to have to get on a bus with this person at some point, right? And what are they going to do? With cyberbullying, that's not the case. So to kind of watch the conversation trickle there and hear the nuances, and then hear their personal experiences and their personal reflections on it, that was really kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, at least, back in the day, if you were bullied at school, at least you could go home at the end of the day and you'd get a little reprieve from it. At the end of the day, it was over with, and then, you had, when you went back to school, but you'd have to maybe face it again. But today, like cyberbullying, it's 24/7. Like you can't really get away from it when you get home, because it's, you might get bullied at school, and then cyberbullying, you get bullied at home.
Absolutely. And that's one of the best things about Socratic Seminars for me, is it allows me to ask these, and sometimes I'll do it on purpose. We're going to ask these big questions that are so far out of the norm. Students tend to get into this thing where it's because it's always been done this way, that's just the way it's always going to be done. So we were doing a question on migrations, and I posed in the debrief, I just posed the question, what if we just got rid of borders? What if there were no borders? What if you could just go wherever you wanted to go? You didn't have to have these checks and controls. And to watch in real time them work through the risks, potential positives of that, it's really fun. It's made this class really enjoyable for me.
You ever find yourself surprised by their level of insight or intellect on certain topics, or just some of the ideas, or maybe they surprise you and you realize maybe that, or that's something that I didn't think of before, and your students open even your own eyes to something?
It's really incredible. One, they attack it from a place where, sure, they may have some kind of light bias, or they may be influenced by their parents in some way, but eventually they just are, you just watch them, like I said, talk through the issue, and they come to some places where it's like, you need to write a paper about this, or you need to do your presentation on this. These are things that you're really passionate about. And some of the issues that I see students in our area most passionate about are influenced by media, right? So it's like, our waterways, water pollution, taking care of that. And so that's one big issue that I see come up with our groups year in and year out in the last few years. Human trafficking is a big one, but to hear their standpoint and then to see them try to pose solutions to that, it's really nice when they break away from the idea that these things will be impossible to do. And that can be really kind of motivating for me as a teacher.
So the Socratic Seminars, is that something that is part of the like mandated curriculum for a global perspectives class, or is that something kind of unique that to your classroom that you choose to do?
So before I was the ACE Global Perspectives teacher and ACE coordinator, I taught a class called General Paper. I'd been at North for a while. I'd been doing just kind of English on level and both freshmen and sophomores, and then finally they allowed me to do some honors classes. Then eventually we became an ACE school, and I started with ACE General Paper. And the Socratic Seminars were just something I found online, and I kind of tweaked it to fit what I wanted to do in my class, and we would use it to talk about the different books that we were reading. And it was a way for it not to get away from me being the centerpiece. I didn't want to be the centerpiece. I felt like they had so much more to offer.
Yeah, because like you just kind of sit off to the side and let them talk, and you interject here and there, but for the most part, you just leave it to them to discuss.
And they do a good job. And I'm always there as a safety net, right? And I like to tell them, like, the safety net is right above the ground, right? But I'm there for you, and I'll redirect, or if I feel like somebody's either repetitive or if they're maybe, we kind of call it controlling the discussion, I'll jump in and just kind of pass it over to somebody else. But that happens so rarely now, they just kind of get used to it. But it's not required or anything. It's just a really good way, in my opinion, of if the point of the class is to take a global issue and think about all the different perspectives, there's no better way than to let these students vocalize their own perspectives. The real test is figuring out why their perspective is what it is, right? Why do they see this issue in the way they do? What's influenced them? Is it all their parents? Is it the media? Is it what they actually believe is right? And here's the evidence to back that up. That's what gets really interesting.
And it's important for them to, not only articulate their beliefs and get comfortable talking about their beliefs, but also hearing different perspectives from people from different backgrounds. Sure. And like when I was interviewing you for the video, you mentioned how polarized the United States is today, especially politically. And if you can get a group of students from different backgrounds to just sit and talk to each other and learn something, you said that somebody might have a different viewpoint than you or you don't agree with, and that's okay, as long as they can understand. If you're able to articulate your viewpoint in a way that helps somebody else understand where you're coming from, that can go a long way. And
it's so important where we are right now. And the reality is, it feels polarized, but when you have the conversations where you sit down and say, I think we need more gun control versus no, we should not have more gun control. When you start to then explore why you think that way, you realize that each view has a little bit in common, right? And it's okay for us not to agree. That doesn't mean we won't agree on a whole bunch of other issues and that we can't walk out of there and say, oh man, that was a really good conversation. And that's where I think we need to get to. And I think it's not going to start with, older people who are, really just, they're entrenched in their positions. It's going to start by letting kids know, hey, you're entitled to whatever viewpoint you want to have. Can you back it up? And are you willing to be open-minded and listen to the opposition? Because that's the real key, and that's what I think is missing.
And another thing I like about just seeing students, especially high school students, just sitting around looking at each other in the eye and talking to each other about, important topics is, just seeing them talk to each other instead of, looking down at their phones, which, of course is, they're just ubiquitous these days, just everywhere you look. Every time I go to a campus, not during instruction time, but, in the halls, in between classes, so many students have their headphones in, looking down at their phones. And
you see that in faculty meetings, right? I mean, you probably see it in meetings.
I'm guilty of it too, of course. So, but, how important is it to just get them away from those devices and, just actually talk face to face with somebody for several minutes?
I think it's incredibly important, and it's challenging, right? Because they're so used to having that to trope back to at some point. Even if they do a couple minutes, they can go to their phone and find that information. And I don't have a problem with, finding something on your phone, getting a little anecdote here or there. What I have a problem with is when you give the anecdote, but you don't have a follow-up. right? Like, oh, this is what Google tells me. Okay, but what does that mean for you? What does that mean for your viewpoint? What does that mean for the argument that you're trying to make? Does that really support it? Does that open it up to more criticism? Like, where's the middle ground there? So to obviously watching kids interact, and we do a lot of collaborative activities in my room because a component of our exam requires collaboration, but to watch kids interact with each other and to talk about these huge issues, right? Climate change is a massive issue. Terrorism is a big issue. Migrations are a big issue. To hear them talk about it intelligently, and to also enjoy talking about it, I think is obviously pretty rewarding.
So kind of piggybacking on the technology topic,
Mm-hmm.
kind of segue into what you're teaching them right now, what they're learning about in class. You say you're working on like a digital futures unit, so to speak, right now,
Yep.
where you said you're talking about the internet, artificial intelligence, social networks, robotics.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what is it about those that they're learning about?
So our first unit back is digital futures, the internet, social networks, and AI is the title. And so we started with just talking about internet access around the world, the different places where internet companies perhaps are looking to expand. And first we kind of weighed, after looking at the percentage of internet access, the cost of internet access around the world, we had them think about the idea of Mark Zuckerberg. This isn't overly recent, but he led a coalition of companies to expand internet access into Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and then some countries in Asia. And we kind of weighed the idea of there's a humanitarian effort, there's a philosophy, I'm blanking on the word, but in any case, a philanthropic idea there to his movement.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a really good chance that he's going to profit from that. And so I had the kids kind of weigh if it matters. And it's interesting to hear some argue that, yeah, we have to question, is this really an issue of ethics and morality, or is this just economics for him? Is he just trying to put some more money in his pocket? And that gets to be an interesting conversation. Mm-hmm. And then from there, we went to just the idea of internet access, period. And the question I posed to them was, is it a human right? We had just recently done, before break, we had asked, is access to clean water a human right? Should it be? And so we did that with internet. Is internet access a human right? Should it be? And initially, everybody was no, that's not the case. And then we started to think about the disadvantages that those that don't have internet are faced with. And I brought some into the middle. And it's kind of always my idea is to move them to the middle, which is the fun part about teaching the class, is that I can jump back and forth. So
you kind of play really both sides.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. What's interesting, so you said originally most of them were no, internet's not a human right.
Yeah,
but
very
some of them maybe moved a little bit. And
they were looking at it purely from the standpoint of, if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. Like, that's too bad for you. And so the interesting part there is we start to look at our own biases. Can we really understand what improvements could be made in Sub-Saharan Africa from our kind of American comfort lifestyle, where we all have Chromebooks in our classroom? Mm-hmm. The majority of them, I think in my class of 40, all but 2 of them had a smartphone with them, right? And so, once we started to kind of poke holes in some of that, they worked their way. I wouldn't say they made it to the middle or they made it to the other side, but they at least were starting to see they can't find the same jobs. They probably don't have access to the same quality of education. They probably don't have access to the same reading material. Even just looking up, is this thing healthy for me to eat? They're missing some of that stuff that these other massive populations have. And so are they kind of stuck in a cycle because they don't have internet access?
Well, and kind of not really on the same question, but it's interesting and kind of scary to think about, what would happen if the internet just went down one day? Mm-hmm. Like what would happen to society at large, especially here in the United States? Like, what if the internet just stopped working?
Yeah. And we talked about that. We talked about this Internet of Things,
yeah,
where everything's communicating. Well, what happens when those things stop communicating? Because the reality is technology has made our lives so much easier that, there's definitely a portion of the people who know how to do all their stuff that they need to do with automobiles and mechanics, right? Not everybody does. And so if the car's not telling you, maybe you don't know, just down to those simple things. Or traffic lights being all tuned into each other.
Banking,
yeah, ATM, right? Yeah, all that stuff. So I think the students initially kind of underestimated how much artificial intelligence and technology is in their lives. But it wasn't so much that they underestimated it, it's just so integrated that they don't even think about it. It's just there, always.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, do you think they have a sense of what the internet has done to them in a sense, or because I mean I grew up, I was born in '89, so the internet, I was a young child when the internet kind of boom happened.
Yeah.
And so I still remember a world before the internet, but the students today, they don't remember a world where there was no internet.
Yeah.
And how do you think the internet has changed teaching and students?
You know, it's funny
Today.
because we talked about Google Classroom.
Yeah.
One of the things somebody brought up was, how different our classes would be with Google Classroom. And then it led to a little bit of a discussion of better, worse, neutral. But in any case, they felt like initially it went from, with a lot of teaching initiatives that I've seen in my career, it's at first they pose it and it's like, oh, this is going to be awful. This is way too much change. We're not going to be able to do this. And I kind of felt that way at first with Google Classroom. And then all of a sudden everybody was on board, and now probably it's so fully integrated into their room they can't live without it. And I think that's kind of what the students were getting at. A few of them said, we wish that not all of our assignments were through Google Classroom in some cases. And obviously that varies across the schedule, and it's not to knock any teacher who's using it, but it's just kind of funny that stood out to them as something to mention, was this idea that it's such an important part of our classroom, and it is an important part of mine, right? All my presentations are on the smartboard. All of them are via Prezi. I use Google Classroom for at least one major assignment a quarter, and I post our weekly quotation goes on there. All of our resources that I provide to them goes on there. So, yeah, it integrates its way in, and it almost does it. It's just subconscious. It subtly just slips in there, and then the next thing you know, you're using it all the time.
Speaking about artificial intelligence, I don't know what specific discussions you've had, if any, yet so far with the students about it. But have you gotten to that yet? Have they discussed artificial intelligence or where it's going?
We'll start really getting into it next week. They're going to talk about the idea of robotics and artificial intelligence, and they're actually going to put together 10-minute lessons on different themes. They don't know that yet, but they're going to put together 10-minute lessons on the different themes. Yeah, exactly. Here it comes. And so we'll see where they want to go with it. I have had a few papers from students for their final that have been written on automation and artificial intelligence. So they are kind of approaching it from the viewpoint that it's going to hurt employment, like it's going to change the way we employ. We've dabbled in the idea of universal basic income, and is that a real response? And that gets some pretty interesting, reactions from students, because they see it as this thing where it's like, oh, you're just going to give people money because we have robots? And everything we talk about always kind of comes back to economics versus something, right? It's economics versus culture, it's economics versus ethics. And so, those are interesting discussions to have with 16, 17, and 18-year-olds.
Yeah, so you talked about this stuff with your students last year in the class?
We didn't do digital futures.
No, you didn't?
This is a new unit, actually.
Because I'm curious to see if artificial intelligence is something that worries or scares students.
So I did ask them the question, is technology something that you feel are you concerned about it? We did a timeline just kind of looking at when the first computer and then the internet and all these different things, and what percentage of the population had smartphones over what time. And I said, is this something that concerns you? Is this something that worries you? And across the board, there wasn't one person that raised their hand and said they were concerned. So I had to kind of pull out of it. And then it was, well, maybe we're not as prepared to interact face-to-face as we used to be. Maybe we're not as prepared to deal with the unexpected as we used to be, because we can just always find a solution on our phone or on our computer. So that was a little bit of an issue, but we haven't got into the artificial intelligence.
None of them were worried about it?
None of them were worried.
I guess maybe they haven't thought about all the different possibilities.
And my two classes are very different. So the fact that they were on the same page about that was kind of funny.
Yeah. Because I always, think about it sometimes, and it's like if you create something even if it becomes self-aware, self-conscious, you can program a artificially intelligent robot or whatever to perform a task. Yeah. And then there's always the risk of, well, you might ask it to do something and it will do that task, but it might do it in a way that doesn't line up with our morals or ethics. I think Elon Musk used an example one time talking about, like, what if you create some kind of program that its only purpose is to eliminate spam emails or whatever, but you don't tell it how you want it to do that. Well, it might just be like, well, the easiest way to eliminate spam is to just eliminate all the humans. Then you won't have spam anymore.
Right,
So,
right. Or it might just start taking out emails out of your inbox. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
this person really doesn't need that. It's not that important. They decide, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. Is when artificial intelligence, because we often refer back to like technological holocaust, and this could be it.
Yeah,
Terminator.
Terminator.
Yeah, everybody wants to talk about Terminator, and that'll probably happen next week because we're showing a couple of the videos just to show them how far robotics has advanced. We'll do a couple Boston Dynamic videos. We'll talk about
Those things
artificial
scare me.
intelligence. Yeah, they're climbing walls. They're
Yeah.
jumping things. They're running faster than humans are going to run.
It looks fake. Some of the videos they put out, I see it and I'm like, that's not real.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not there yet, but
Well, the old joke used to be if the zombie apocalypse happens, I don't actually have to be that fast. I have to be faster than the people that are with me immediately.
yeah.
When the technological holocaust happens or that starts to go downhill, it doesn't matter how fast
Knock
you are.
on wood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever watched the show Black Mirror?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, because there's an episode, I think the one called
Black Dog.
Metalhead. I think
Metalhead,
it's called.
Metalhead,
The one that's in black and white.
Yep. Mhm.
That episode reminds me of the Boston Dynamics robots, like
Yeah.
what they could potentially end up being one day if
And
everything
didn't
goes
that
horribly
start-
wrong.
Didn't that start, spoiler alert, but didn't that start, they moved a box on like the third level of a warehouse?
And all of a sudden,
there
there's
was,
this robot dog
and it was
that
just down one really quick spiral.
scary to think about. Okay, is there anything else that you're talking to your students about that you're really excited about, or something you did last semester?
I'd say the most common issue that students bring up, papers, presentations, is climate change, really. And I don't know why that is. It could be that it's just everywhere. We see it on our social media networks. We see it in our news. And I was actually talking to Adam Malloy about this. I thought it would be interesting to do a unit where I taught the same exact topic every other, for 2 days, but from each day I did it in a different perspective. So from one point, you'd teach the same exact topic, but you'd be from the point where, climate change is natural variation, man has very little to do with it, where then the next day you turn around and teach the next time they come into class, you teach the same topic from a point where it's like, oh no, this is all, humans. I thought it would be interesting to see the students' reactions to that. I haven't gotten around to really planning it out, and it's going to take some effort, but it fits into what the idea of the class is, right? I can make this argument what I need it to be. Am I open to that? Am I open to those things that challenge the way I see climate change?
Do you get a mixed bag of opinions on climate change from your students, or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag on every global
Yeah.
issue. And some kids are better at kind of explaining why it is they think that way and really understanding why it is they think that way than others. But that's the whole point of the year of study, that by the end of the year, everybody can do that. Everybody can participate in these discussions.
Yeah. Just to maybe wrap up before we move on to the final 5 questions, why do you feel it's so important? Global perspectives, the class you teach, it's a lot different than the core subjects that we might think of in the classroom. Why do you think it's so important for students to take a class like yours?
I think it's important because now more than ever, there's supposed to be all these people who are experts, right? They all have information to give you. And if you're only taking that information at face value without doing any of the legwork of researching its accuracy, really reflecting on how it impacts you, then you're never really going to have a big picture of what your feelings are on a viewpoint. You're just basically copying others. And so with all the information that comes through social media, with all the information that comes through the media, all of that stuff, I want my students to be able to kind of sift through it and figure out where their opinions are. What's their viewpoint? Why do they think that way? Can you go tell somebody else, an adult, anybody else, why it is you think that way? Instead of just taking everything at face value, or instead of just saying, oh, I hate that idea, or that idea is terrible, right? The reality is the world we live in now doesn't really reward reflection. It rewards the 15-second angry response or super joyful, whatever it might be, super joyful response, but it doesn't award taking the time to go down and do the research, to really reflect on why you think that way, and then to put something intelligent out. It just wants, everything is lightning speed.
Yeah, news outlets seem to like to attract people on the polar opposite sides of an issue, and when in reality, most people are probably somewhere in the middle.
Sure.
Okay, Jeremy Ridgeo, what is your favorite book?
Favorite book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
So I've never read it, but I recently saw the movie for the first time.
Very different.
Are they?
Yeah. The movie is good in its own right. I think the book is great. To do the movie great, in my opinion, is going to require a mix of movie and animation if you're really going to get into it. The other thing I would suggest is if you're going to read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest for the first time, read a couple chapters out of the electric Kool-Aid acid test, kind of is where the book eventually stemmed from. But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a really good look at man versus machine. Interesting, like gender role things to look at there too that are kind of reversed in the book for some time. And then, of course, all the different things that come from the electric Kool-Aid acid test and different tests that they used to do psychologically and using drugs and stuff, LSD and all that stuff on patients back in the day that obviously aren't around anymore.
Who's the author of that again?
Ken Kesey.
Ken Kesey, okay. And full disclosure, you actually sent me your answers to these questions ahead of time, and you gave me your favorite fiction book and your favorite nonfiction book.
Yeah. I'm originally an English teacher, so
Okay.
so that's where I was first. That's what I did for about 11 years before I became the coordinator. I did 1 year as a full-time coordinator and wanted to get back in the classroom and saw Global Perspectives as a really interesting way to do that, and it's kind of reinvigorated what I do.
And so you said your favorite nonfiction book is
The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt. It's a more recent one.
Yeah,
And that could be a little bit of recency bias, but it's really good.
Yeah, I've read it, kind of the main focus of the book is they talk about. Well, I actually have some notes here for it that I got because I really like the book too. And so the subtitle is How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure, which sounds kind of almost like they're being a little harsh on the Gen Z. It's about some of the things that they're noticing with the Gen Z,
Right.
or the I generation,
At all levels.
which is what our current students, college age students as well.
Yeah.
And they talk about kind of the three great untruths in their opinion of that seem to be becoming more popular in today's society. And it's the three great untruths that they say are: what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Always trust your feelings, and life is a battle between good people and evil people. And the book is kind of a thesis on, maybe we should rethink the way we're kind of looking at the world.
I think that third one really speaks to the class that I teach, right? Life is a battle between good people and evil people, and it's hoping that people can realize that that's really not the case.
It's not so as black and white as that.
Yeah, you don't agree with me. That doesn't make you the evil person in that story. And if it does, then I have to consider that in that other person's viewpoint, I'm the evil person. And that can be tricky to put that aside, right? To go, oh, wait, if A is true, then so is B.
Yeah.
So that's tough.
And another thing I like from that book is they talk about how it's important to prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child.
It's one of the best quotations.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. To me, the other thing that kind of comes from that is this idea of honest and mean. I think we kind of talked about it beforehand, but it seems like when you're honest with somebody and you tell them, hey, these are the things you're good at and these are the things you need to work on, apparently we're only supposed to tell them the things they were good at and not the things that they could develop, not the things that could improve. And so honest and mean are so often just integrated, and that's not fair. And I think Jonathan Haidt gets at that a little bit, right? Like these kids aren't sensitive just because they are. It's because we've done something that's enabled that sensitivity to come about.
Yeah, and the book goes into, it talks about how the rise of cable news in the 80s, CNN is born, and for the first time, parents are seeing, and crime is prevalent on the news, especially violent crime. So for the first time, parents are seeing all these horrible news stories from all over the country about kidnappings and murders, and they think that, oh my gosh, this world is such a dangerous place. I need to protect my child at all costs. When in reality, crime rates have been steadily decreasing over the years, and kind of
the idea that they can't play outside ananymore.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of sad. Or they can't just go down around the corner to the playground. They always have to be within eyesight. And as a parent of a 20-month-old and a 4-year-old, it takes a bit to allow that release, but it's good for them to have it.
Giving your children a little more independence might
pay off. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, what's your favorite movie or TV show?
Favorite movie is Inception. And it's funny that you said that because it's like year end, you start ranking things. And I just recently was doing this. All right, what are my top 5? And Inception has always, since I first saw it, kind of steadily remained at number 1. The few that might filter in behind them, they shift and jumble around a little bit. But Inception is always my favorite. For some reason, I enjoy movies that don't have a very clear ending.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty up to interpretation. The end with the
definitely
spinning.
ambiguous. Lots of cool stuff going on. All kinds of fan theories of this means this, and he's wearing the ring, and he's not wearing the ring. It's a lot of cool stuff, and I enjoy that.
I love Christopher Nolan. Have you seen the trailer for his new one, Tenet?
Yeah, looks unbelievable.
Looks kind of Inception-esque.
With maybe time instead of dreams.
Yeah.
So that's going to be neat.
He's the best. I think
He's good, too, at finding kind of... sure, Leonardo DiCaprio was in Inception, but he's good at finding these other actors who are a little bit lesser well-known. And
I think Denzel Washington's son is the star in that one.
Yeah.
Have you seen Memento?
I have seen Memento.
I think that's my favorite of his. I really like The Prestige, too.
What's your favorite movie of all time?
Oh, God. My favorite movie of all time? I don't know.
Yeah.
I have so many. My go-to is The Matrix, I think.
Yeah. It's pretty good.
But I don't know. I'm a big fan of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, too.
What's funny is that I go from Inception to Hell or High Water.
Yeah? That's a good one. I've seen that one, too.
It's a good movie, but they're not very similar.
And you told me that your favorite TV show is Mad Men.
There's so much good TV. And when you asked me my favorite, I was like, oh, God, what's my favorite? And then when I really had to stop and think, what do I think was groundbreaking or changed? Some people would argue The Sopranos, obviously, but I think Mad Men.
I've never seen it.
I think Mad Men changed the way. Mad Men was the first TV show where I ever watched, and I was an English major in college. I taught English. It's the first TV show I ever watched where I was like, you could put together a whole. I'm sure they do. You can put together entire classes. This is like a work of art. You can put together everything on this one show.
Yeah, I recently rewatched it. I think I binged the first few seasons on Netflix when I was in college, and then I watched the final couple seasons as they played out in real time on AMC. But I recently rewatched the whole series with my wife, who had never seen it, on Netflix, and it was even better than I remember.
Yeah.
I think the second viewing, I liked it even more.
Yeah.
And somebody asked me recently, like, what my favorite TV show is, and I think I have to kind of separate them into categories almost. Like, I think my favorite, my favorite comedy is The Office. My favorite drama is Mad Men.
Yeah.
And like fantasy, I'm a big Game of Thrones fan too.
Yeah, I like Game of Thrones.
But Mad Men is such a in-depth character study of Don Draper and just delving into what makes somebody the person that they are.
And to make him likable.
I know, because he's such a bad person.
Yeah.
When you think about some of the things he does, all the infidelity and all that. But
I think about the pilot, and you watch him throughout the whole pilot, and then in the last, I think it's 3 minutes of the show, he pulls up to this house and walks in, and there's kids and wife, and you're like, what the heck is going on here? I mean, just the pilot is a masterpiece.
And then, like you said, you end up liking him throughout the series. And he still does some pretty bad things, but then you also you get insights of him trying to be a really good person in a lot of things that he does too.
And then their devotion to being accurate, right? With history it's unmatched, and I appreciate anybody that goes to those types of lengths to do something so well.
Do you think they could make that show today? I
think they could.
Yeah.
When was it? What was the
I think it first came out in 2007 and ran until like 2015.
It'd be close.
Yeah.
It'd be tough. But I think maybe that show, the acting was so good, the writing was so good, I think that it could probably be done.
It treats all of its side characters incredibly well too.
Yeah.
Peggy,
and there's growth. Everybody's a dynamic character. There's no real static characters in the show that last. They all show there's some sort of arc for everybody.
Okay, what's your favorite song or musical artist?
I don't really have a favorite song or musical artist, and what I've noticed more so now than ever with my 4-year-old is I just have this kind of playlist for her, and I hit shuffle when we get in the car, and she's happy as can be. And right now, both my 4-year-old and Quinn, my younger daughter, Sloan is my older daughter, Quinn's my younger daughter, they both love Hooked on a Feeling.
Really?
And I blame the Guardians of the Galaxy, but for some reason it must have come up at a friend's house, and my 20-month-old just starts grooving. It's like the best thing that ever happened, and it's the Hooga Shaka part, and it's
that's good.
My 4-year-old's like, play it again, play it again, play it again. So that's the song that's on repeat right now.
I actually got my wife got me a record player for
awesome.
Christmas, and she bought me two records to start my collection, and one of them is Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack.
Oh, that's a great record.
Yeah.
It's such a great collection of music. So it's funny that that's the song. But anything to get me away from Baby Shark and Into the Unknown from Frozen.
Yeah. Okay, favorite subject in school growing up?
English.
Yeah.
I loved English. I had a really great 11th grade English teacher, Mr. Bradley. he was an inspiring guy. He let us do a lot of the heavy lifting, kind of what I've turned into my classroom. And the one thing I liked about it was, we're going to read this book, and we'll have some guiding questions, right? Setting, things like that. But mostly it's our reaction to it. It's our interpretation of it. And he was the one that first made me in high school realize that we could interpret this book in the way we wanted to, but we weren't going to get away with just saying, oh, I think this. It had to be why. What's pushing you to think that way? And so that was it junior year. And then senior year, I decided I was going to college to study English, and I ended up going to private school to study English, which was maybe a mistake. I guess I could blame my school counselor for that. But, hey, there's plenty of good public schools around here. But it worked out for the best.
So you were an English major in college?
I was an English education. I knew I wanted to be a teacher, and it was largely because of Mr. Bradley.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. If you could have dinner with anyone living or dead, who would it be and why?
It'd be Tom Brady, hands down. I'd like to invite Joe Rogan to come to dinner with us too, though, so maybe the three of us. But Tom Brady, I think I have a real appreciation for sustained excellence, so maybe the answer should have been Bill Belichick. But I think we tend to turn on teams that are successful for a long time. I think we saw it a little bit with the Golden State Warriors in recent years. Mm-hmm. But something about programs and stuff and those types of characters who have figured out a way to be at the highest level of whatever it is for this extended period of time. They've adjusted with the times, they've made adjustments with the way the game is changing, and yet they still are always kind of in the top 5, 8 teams that are going to be there, or programs, or whatever it might be. Just sustained excellence, and I think Tom Brady's a really good example of that, and he seems to be, obviously, what do we know, but he seems to be a pretty good person, too.
Yeah. Well, if she's listening, Miss Patrika, you're probably her newest fan.
Well, there we go. I bet you there's a lot of Tom Brady fans out there, and even
she's your newest fan is what I meant.
Well, there you go. I have some buddies who are huge Bills fans.
Yeah,
and I get at least one of them to acknowledge that Tom Brady is the greatest.
Well, after his last Super Bowl,
yeah,
I don't think there's any question anymore.
Part of me was like, he could have walked away, but at the same time, if he still feels like, hey, I'm slinging it, let's just keep doing it. I'll keep watching.
All right, me too. I'm a big fan as well.
Yeah.
Patriots are my favorite team. My dad's from the Boston area, so
yeah. I'm a fair weather fan. I started with Brady.
Yeah, I actually tend to, because I don't have any affiliation or love for any Florida teams, just because my parents are both Northerners.
Sure.
My dad's from Massachusetts, my mom's from Indiana, so I didn't grow up being a fan of any of the Florida teams.
Your father's a big Patriots fan?
Yeah, and Red Sox. I tend to follow players more than teams. Like when Tom Brady retires, I don't know if I'll be a huge Patriots fan.
I'm with you. Same feeling.
And
I jump over and like the 49ers.
My favorite player, athlete of all time is Steve Nash, basketball.
Oh, yeah.
Played for the Suns. Yeah. And I was like a religious follower of the Suns for a few years when he played, and then he retired. He actually went to the Lakers for a short stint. But when he left the league, I stopped watching basketball pretty much.
But he's sustained excellence at a long time. Even at an older age, he figured out a way to find his niche. Yeah.
All right. Jeremy Ridgeo, Global Perspectives teacher, North Fort Myers High School. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And thank you for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.